Good morning, everyone. They didn't whisper. They screamed, not with their mouths, but with their eyes. The kind that dart away quickly, hoping not to meet yours. Or worse, the ones that linger too long, drinking in your pain like it's entertainment. There are moments in life when you realize that some people don't need to know your story to try to bury it. They just need to see one part of you they don't understand. And suddenly they write the rest of the narrative with cruelty as the ink. I was once called a monster. They told her she was too different to be understood, too strange to be accepted, too unappealing to belong. They told her without even speaking. Sometimes with just a look, other times with a cruel post, a passing laugh, or a deliberately turned back. The world has a way of labeling people who don't fit inside its narrow box, and she shattered that box just by existing. But what they didn't expect, what no one ever saw coming, was that the girl they tried to silence would become the very voice that could not be ignored. Idja grew up with eyes constantly on her, but not in the way that children hope for. Not with admiration, not with curiosity, not even with kindness. The glances came with questions, followed by stares that didn't ask, but judged. Didn't ask, but judged. She was made to feel like an error, a mistake someone forgot to fix. And yet she kept showing up, quietly, carefully, trying not to take up too much space, trying to be small in a world that made her feel invisible for all the wrong reasons. But inside her, something refused to be extinguished. A tiny ember, a whisper of defiance that said, "You're here for a reason." That whisper wasn't loud enough to drown out the noise of the world, at least not at first. But it was consistent. And sometimes that's all it takes. She would go home after school, turn off the lights, and cry and cry. She would scroll through comments that tried to dehumanize her and wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe she was too much, too little, too something. But the truth is, you can only bottle your soul for so long before it starts leaking through the cracks. And slowly, quietly, painfully, she began to let that soul speak. The first time she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. It trembled. It cracked. It came out like an apology. But something powerful happened. She didn't vanish. The ground didn't swallow her whole. Unswallow her whole. And in that terrifying, beautiful moment, she learned that her truth could stand. Not just stand, but carry weight. Real weight. The kind that begins to tip the scales against judgment and ignorance. She didn't speak to prove anyone wrong. She spoke to prove to herself that she still existed. That she mattered. That her story, no matter how dismissed or disfigured by the world, deserved to be told in her own words. She could have stayed silent. It would have been easier, safer, less painful. But she understood something few do. Silence doesn't protect you from judgment. It just gives it room to grow. So she decided to speak louder. With each word, each video, each interview, she shed another layer of the fear they had tried to clothe her in. And what began as a whisper became a roar, not because she got louder, but because the world finally started listening. Her voice wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. It was rehearsed. It was raw, honest, human. And because of that, it reached people. Not just people who looked like her or felt like her, but people who had ever felt othered, excluded, unseen. People who had been called names, ignored in rooms, told they weren't enough, or worse, told they were too much. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was becoming the voice for millions who hadn't yet found their own. And the amazing part, she didn't wait for perfection before she started. She didn't wait to be accepted before she stepped into purpose. She didn't wait for the pain to disappear before turning it into power. She simply started where she was with what she had. A voice, a heart, a story that refused to stay buried. And in doing so, she gave others permission to do the same. She became proof that the most powerful sound in the world isn't the noise of criticism. It's the sound of someone choosing truth in a world that told them to stay silent. So they ain't. Her voice began reaching people she never met, in places she'd never been, in ways she never expected. And each message that came back to her, "You helped me speak up. You made me feel seen. You saved my life," became a new layer of healing. And she began to understand that her voice wasn't just her rescue. It was a lifeline for others. Her courage didn't just echo, it multiplied. It gave birth to a movement, not of fame or followers, but of freedom. Still, the critics didn't disappear. The world doesn't change overnight. And some people will always try to pull others back into silence because they're afraid of what truth sounds like. But she had already made her choice. She wasn't going to dim herself for their comfort. She wasn't going to quiet down just because her truth made others uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. She knew the cost of silence, and she wasn't willing to pay it again, because every time she used her voice, she reclaimed another piece of herself. Every time she told her story, she rewrote someone else's. Her voice became more than a sound. It became a mirror, a compass, a rallying cry. For the child who couldn't speak up, for the teen who cried behind locked doors, for the adult still carrying wounds from words spoken decades ago. She was no longer just a girl who had been labeled. She was a woman who had risen. There's something unstoppable about someone who's no longer afraid of being seen, who's no longer afraid of being misunderstood, who has looked at the worst of what the world has thrown at them and said, I still choose to speak. That's who she became. Not a monster, not a victim, but a vessel of truth, a voice for millions. And the best part, she's still speaking, still shining, still daring others to step into their own stories and realize they were never too broken, too weird, too different to be worthy of love, light, and a life filled with purpose. She didn't wake up one morning feeling brave. She didn't look in the mirror and immediately see strength and oh. In fact, there were days, long, quiet days, where she barely recognized the reflection staring back. Pain has a way of distorting things, of making even the brightest souls question their own worth. But something deep inside her refused to let the pain have the final word. She had spent so many nights asking, why me? But eventually that question shifted. It became a what now? And that subtle change, that was where the power began to rise. For a long time, the pain felt like a prison. It wasn't just the external stares or the mocking words. It was the internal echo they left behind. The way she began to doubt her place, question her value, and wonder if love, belonging, or even joy were meant for people like her. Pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it shows up as exhaustion. Sometimes it disguises itself as numbness. But it was always there. Until one day she looked at it and said, if I have to carry this, I might as well carry it with purpose. That was the moment everything shifted. The moment pain stopped being a weight and started becoming fuel. She realized she had a choice, to let the pain continue defining her or to let it refine her. And she chose the latter. She decided that if the world was going to try and break her spirit, she would let it break away every lie she believed instead. She would turn every insult into a reminder of her endurance, every rejection into a redirection. Every wound into a window where the light could finally get in. At first, it was hard to believe that anything beautiful could come from something so bruising. But healing doesn't ask for permission. It simply begins, slowly, softly, one breath at a time. And as she began to heal, she also began to speak, not from the places that were already polished, but from the ones that are still bleeding. She didn't wait until the pain was over. She used it as it was, raw, honest, human. Her story wasn't wrapped in perfection. It wasn't a fairy tale with a quick resolution. It was a living testimony of what it means to wake up hurting and still choose to rise. To be labeled as weak and still show up with fierce, unshakable grace. To be told she would never be enough and still decide she was worthy of everything the world tried to withhold. Pain had once convinced her that she was small, that she should shrink herself to fit into other people's expectations. But she realized something powerful. The pain was not there to punish her. It was there to prepare her. To build capacity, to stretch her heart until it could hold compassion for others. Until it could speak not just to pain, but through it. And once she understood that, she became unstoppable. She started using her story as a bridge, as a light, as a mirror for others who were still stuck in the shadows of their own battles. She began turning pain into language. Language that spoke directly to those who had no words for what they were feeling. And the more she spoke, the more others began to breathe a little deeper, stand a little taller. Because if she could rise from that, maybe they could too. The world often sees pain as something to hide, as weakness, as shame. But she proved the opposite. She made pain visible, not to glorify it, but to show that surviving it was possible. She didn't pretend to have it all together. She didn't cover the scars. Instead, she let them be symbols of survival, each one saying, you thought this would break me, but here I am, building from it. Her strength didn't come from avoiding the pain. It came from walking through it again and again and coming out stronger each time. She used to wonder if the hurt would ever stop. And now, she wonders how many lives she can touch because of it. That's the transformation. That's the power. That's the transformation. When pain is no longer the chain around your ankle, but the wind beneath your wings. She learned to honor her past without being imprisoned by it, to acknowledge the hurt without living in it, to carry the lessons without carrying the bitterness. In that balance, that grace, that fierce commitment to growth, it became her superpower. The very thing that once made her cry herself to sleep became the reason she wakes up and keeps going. And here's what's most beautiful. She didn't just heal for herself. Oh, she healed for every girl who was told she was too different, for every child who was laughed at instead of loved, for every person who's ever sat alone, thinking they were the only one hurting. Her healing was an act of defiance. A quiet, steady rebellion against the narrative that said she should disappear. She took the words meant to wound her and rewrote them into something sacred. She turned the pain into poetry, into speeches, into stories, into light. And the very people who once laughed, now listen. Now listen. The ones who doubted now draw strength from her resilience, because pain didn't stop her. It sculpted her. She became the kind of person who doesn't just survive storms. She becomes shelter for others inside of them. She became a reminder that yes, life can hurt. People can be cruel. People can be cruel. Circumstances can break your heart. But if you choose it, if you fight for it, your pain can be your power. Your struggle can become your strength. Your scars can sing a song of survival. She's not immune to pain now. She still feels, still cries, still has moments of doubt. But the difference is, she no longer lets pain silence her. She lets it shape her voice. A voice that's tender, strong, and unwavering. A voice that echoes, you are not your pain. You are what you build from it. And so she keeps building, keeps rising, keeps building, keeps rising, keeps speaking. Because what once tried to destroy her, they looked at her and thought they saw the whole story. As if a face could tell you someone's worth. As if a body could reveal the fullness of a soul. She felt it in the way people glanced, quickly then away, like her presence was too much for their comfort. She heard it in the words not said, those silent pauses, the stifled whispers, the awkward kindness that wasn't kindness at all. It wasn't just what they said, it was what they assumed. They thought they understood her based on what they saw. What they saw. But what they didn't realize is that she was never asking to be understood. She was asking to be seen. Not for the surface, but for the spirit that lived underneath it. She had grown up being looked at more than listened to. It wasn't vanity, it was reality. When your appearance doesn't meet the world's narrow standards, you get reduced, boxed, dismissed. You stop being a person and start becoming a projection. People thought they were being careful with their stares, but she noticed. She always noticed. She always noticed. She noticed the way store clerks looked past her, the way classmates whispered, the way strangers either pitied her or pretended she didn't exist. And at first, she tried to mold herself, to make herself more acceptable, more palatable, less noticeable. Aww. But she could only contort for so long. The mask she tried to wear didn't fit. It suffocated her. And one day, she made a decision. She was done trying to become invisible just to make others more comfortable. She was done letting the shape of her features define the size of her voice. She was done letting appearance dictate identity. That decision didn't happen in a dramatic moment. It wasn't a movie scene. It was quiet, private. A moment in the mirror where she looked at herself, not with shame, but with recognition. This is me. This is my face. This is my frame. This is my life. This is my life. And it is not a mistake. It is not something to hide. It is not something that disqualifies me from joy, love, purpose, or dignity. It is mine. And I will no longer beg for the world to see it as beautiful. I will know that it is, and that is enough. 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 For so long, she had let society convince her that beauty and worth were tied together, that if you didn't fit the mold, you didn't belong. But the mold was broken the day she was born. Instead of trying to glue it back together, she learned to stand outside it entirely. She stopped measuring herself by reflections and started measuring by impact. She asked herself different questions. Did I show kindness today? Did I use my voice to lift someone else? Did I hold space for honesty? Those became her mirror. Those became her mirror. Those became her new definition of beauty. When she walked into rooms now, she didn't shrink. She didn't apologize for her presence. She didn't explain her differences. She entered as she was, not because she had to prove anything, but because she had nothing to hide. And what's extraordinary is that when she stopped apologizing for herself, others started shifting too. People began to respond not to what they saw, but to what they felt. Confidence, not conceit. Groundedness, not ego. Wholeness, not perfection. There's something undeniably magnetic about someone who refuses to be boxed in. She had become that. Not by changing herself, but by coming home to herself. The comments still came sometimes. The stares didn't vanish overnight, but their power did. Because what once would have sent her spiraling now rolled off her spirit like water. She had made peace with the skin she lived in. And when you've made peace with yourself, the opinions of others lose their grip. She started speaking, not because she wanted a platform, but because she wanted connection. She wanted others, especially those who felt unseen, to know that they were not alone. That identity is not determined by a mirror or a magazine cover. That you are not your features, your weight, your skin, your symmetry. You are your breath, your story, your kindness, your courage, your spirit. She began telling her story in schools and conferences on stages. And the most common thing people said afterward wasn't about her looks at all. It was, "You made me feel seen." And that was everything. Because what she had once feared would make people turn away was now the very reason they leaned in. Her vulnerability, her truth, her boldness, they weren't distractions from who she was. They were who she was. There's a kind of power that rises from someone who's no longer hiding, who stands in full truth and says, "This is me, and I am not broken." She became a living example of what it means to stop performing and start being. To strip away society's definitions and replace them with your own. And when you do that, you don't just set yourself free. You start freeing others. You start freeing others. You give people around you permission to step out of their own hiding places and breathe. She still has tough days. We all do. But now, when doubt creeps in, she reminds herself of what she knows to be true. That her value never had anything to do with her appearance. And that who she is, at her core, is unshakable. And no label, no look, no outside voice can undo that truth. She didn't need to be beautiful by the world's standards to be powerful. She needed to be real. And in being real, she became radiant. And in being real, she became radiant with truth, with dignity, with depth. She radiated not because she changed who she was, but because she finally owned who she was. And that is the power of refusing to let appearance define identity. That is the strength of someone who has faced judgment, rejection, and cruelty, and still chosen to stand. Still chosen to stand. Still chosen to speak. Still chosen to rise. So to anyone who has ever been made to feel like they were less than because of how they look, listen to her story and let it echo in your chest. You are not a reflection. You are a revolution. You are not made to blend in. You were born to stand out. And you do not need to be seen by everyone to be worth everything. She proved that. And so can you.